Cristiano Ronaldo sat quietly in the back seat of his sleek black car, his gaze fixed on the world outside the window. The city was alive with its usual chaos: honking cars, bustling markets, and pedestrians weaving through the streets with purpose. It was the kind of evening where everything seemed ordinary, yet it wasn't. As the car slowed down at a busy intersection, something caught Ronaldo's eye. A small crowd had gathered by the side of the road, their animated gestures and loud voices standing out against the city's background noise. At first, Ronaldo thought it was a typical street quarrel, the kind that often resolved itself quickly. But then he noticed something that made his chest tighten. A frail elderly man stood in the center of the commotion, clutching a worn leather bag to his chest. His face, lined with age, was etched with fear and desperation. The men around him loomed aggressively, their voices harsh and accusatory. Ronaldo leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing as he took in the scene. "Slow down," he instructed his driver, his voice calm but firm. As the car rolled to a near halt, Ronaldo's sharp instincts kicked in. Something about the situation felt wrong. His gut told him this wasn't just an argument, it was something more. The driver hesitated for a moment. "Everything all right, sir?" "Stop the car," Ronaldo said decisively. Without waiting for a response, he opened the door and stepped out. The air felt colder than it had moments ago, or maybe that was just the tension he'd sensed. His towering presence immediately drew attention, the quiet authority he carried making people pause mid-motion. Whispers began to ripple through the onlookers as they realized who he was. "Is that Ronaldo?" someone murmured. "What's he doing here?" Ignoring the growing buzz, Ronaldo's focus remained locked on the elderly man. As he approached, he could hear fragments of the heated conversation. "You still owe us," one of the men barked, his voice laced with irritation. "Stop lying and pay what you owe." "I told you," the elderly man stammered, his voice trembling. "I just need a little more time." The vulnerability in his voice hit Ronaldo hard. The man's frail hands trembled as he clutched the bag tighter, his shoulders slumping under the weight of what seemed like more than just the accusations. This wasn't just a dispute over money. It was an exploitation of weakness. "What's going on here?" Ronaldo's voice rang out, calm but firm, cutting through the noise like a blade. The group of men turned toward him, their expressions shifting from irritation to confusion and then recognition. For a moment, their bravado faltered. The elderly man, too, looked up, his eyes widening as he registered who had spoken. One of the younger men, likely emboldened by the crowd's attention, crossed his arms and smirked. "This has nothing to do with you," he said, his tone defensive. "We're just sorting out some business." Ronaldo's piercing gaze locked onto him, and the man's smirk began to waver. "Sorting out business?" Ronaldo repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. He gestured toward the elderly man. "He doesn't look like someone who can handle this kind of business. What's really going on here?" The elderly man spoke up, his voice barely audible. "They're asking for money I owe them," he admitted, his eyes darting nervously between Ronaldo and the group. "I borrowed a small amount to get through a tough time, but I couldn't pay it back as quickly as they wanted. Now they're demanding more, much more." Ronaldo's jaw tightened as he listened. He turned his attention back to the group, his calm demeanor masking the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "So you're demanding more than he owes? From someone who clearly doesn't have much to begin with?" The leader of the group hesitated, his confidence cracking under Ronaldo's unwavering stare. "We just want what's ours," he muttered defensively, though his voice lacked the strength it had moments ago. Ronaldo took a step closer, his presence towering over the group. "What you're doing isn't right," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "Taking advantage of someone's struggles doesn't make you strong. It makes you a bully." The elderly man looked down at his shoes, his frailty evident in the way his shoulders sagged. Ronaldo placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, his touch firm but gentle. "Don't worry," he said softly. "This stops now." The tension in the air was palpable, the onlookers holding their breath as they watched the scene unfold. Ronaldo's commanding presence had shifted the power dynamic entirely. The group of men exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado completely gone. "Leave him alone," Ronaldo said firmly. "Whatever he owes, I'll handle it. But this is the last time you exploit someone like this." The crowd murmured in awe, their admiration for Ronaldo growing with every word. The elderly man's eyes filled with tears, his lips trembling as he whispered, "Thank you." Ronaldo gave him a small nod. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "No one should have to face this kind of treatment." As the men reluctantly backed off, the elderly man stood a little straighter, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. The scene ended not with shouting, but with a quiet triumph, the kind that left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. And with that, Ronaldo turned to the man and said, "Let's get you home." The air grew heavy as Cristiano Ronaldo stood before the group of young men who had been harassing the frail elderly man. The tension was palpable, a mix of unease and defiance emanating from the group. The elderly man, Alex, stood just behind Ronaldo, his worn face reflecting a mix of fear and relief. For the first time that day, Alex felt like someone was truly on his side. Ronaldo's gaze was calm but unrelenting as he looked at the men. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady yet carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. His question hung in the air, silencing the murmurs of the growing crowd around them. One of the younger men, likely emboldened by the attention, crossed his arms and stepped forward. "It's none of your business," he said, his tone dismissive, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of nervousness. "We're just sorting out a debt." Ronaldo raised an eyebrow, his expression unchanging. "Sorting out a debt," he repeated, his voice calm but layered with skepticism. He gestured toward Alex, who was clutching his worn leather bag as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the ground. "From where I'm standing, it looks like you're bullying a man who can't defend himself." The young man opened his mouth to retort, but Ronaldo held up a hand, silencing him. "Before you say anything else," Ronaldo continued, his voice growing sharper, "why don't you explain what this debt is?" Alex hesitated, his frail shoulders trembling slightly. He glanced nervously at the group of men before looking up at Ronaldo, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, Alex spoke, his voice shaky but clear. I borrowed a small amount of money from them a few months ago," he said, his words coming slowly as if each one weighed heavily on his heart. "It was for medicine. I promised to pay them back, but I've been struggling to make ends meet. Now they're demanding double what I borrowed, and I just don't have it." Ronaldo's jaw tightened, his usually relaxed demeanor hardening as he absorbed Alex's words. He turned back to the young men, his piercing gaze making them shift uncomfortably. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. The leader of the group shrugged, attempting to maintain his composure. "He owes us money," he said defensively. "We're just trying to get what's ours." "What's yours?" Ronaldo shot back, his tone sharp enough to cut through the thick tension in the air. "Taking advantage of someone's desperation isn't about what's yours. It's about greed. This isn't justice, it's cruelty." The crowd, which had been silently watching, began to murmur. The weight of Ronaldo's words hung in the air, their truth undeniable. The young men exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado crumbling under the scrutiny of not just Ronaldo, but the onlookers. Alex lowered his gaze, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried to pay them back, but every time I saved enough, something else came up. Food, rent, medicine." He shook his head, tears pooling in his eyes. "I just needed more time." Ronaldo placed a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder, the gesture firm yet gentle. "You don't need to explain yourself anymore," he said softly. Turning back to the group, his expression darkened. "This stops now." The leader of the group scoffed, though the nervous glint in his eyes betrayed him. "And what are you going to do about it?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt at defiance. Ronaldo stepped forward, his towering presence making the man instinctively take a step back. "Here's what I'm going to do," Ronaldo said, his voice low but filled with authority. "I'll pay off whatever Alex owes you, every penny, but understand this. This is the last time you exploit someone like him. If I ever hear about you harassing him, or anyone else, I'll make sure you regret it." The young man swallowed hard, his confidence shattered. "Fine," he muttered, looking down. "We'll take the money." Ronaldo's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before turning back to Alex. "How much do they say you owe?" he asked gently. Alex hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I borrowed, twice as much." Ronaldo nodded and reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. As he counted out the money, the crowd watched in awe. It wasn't just the act of paying, it was the calm dignity with which he handled the situation, his quiet determination to right a wrong. He handed the money to the young man, his eyes locking with his. "Take it," Ronaldo said, his voice firm, "and leave him alone." The group took the money without a word, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. They slinked away, disappearing into the crowd as the tension began to lift. Ronaldo turned back to Alex, who was staring at him with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," Alex whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ronaldo smiled softly, placing a hand on Alex's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "No one should have to face this alone." The crowd began to disperse, but the memory of what they had witnessed lingered in their minds. For them, it wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was a reminder that true strength lies in standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Ronaldo turned to Alex. "Let me take you home," he said. "You deserve to feel safe again." The street seemed to hold its breath as Ronaldo stood firm, his presence commanding attention. The young men who only moments ago had been brimming with bravado now looked unsure, their earlier arrogance shrinking under the weight of his gaze. Alex, the elderly man caught in the center of this storm, stood silently, his hands trembling as they clutched the worn leather bag to his chest. The lines on his face told a story of hardship, but his teary eyes revealed a glimmer of hope, a hope ignited by Ronaldo's intervention. Ronaldo's hand moved to his pocket, the motion deliberate and steady. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, curiosity replacing tension. The young men exchanged confused glances, their bravado hanging by a thread. "What's he doing?" one of them whispered, his voice betraying his unease. As Ronaldo pulled out his wallet, the air around him seemed to shift. He opened it calmly, his expression unwavering, and began counting out cash. His actions were slow and measured, each bill carefully placed in his hand. The young men watched intently, their confusion deepening into disbelief. Ronaldo wasn't just stepping in, he was taking responsibility, something they hadn't expected. He looked up, holding the money firmly in his hand. "This is the amount you say he owes," Ronaldo said, his voice even, "including the extra you demanded." His tone carried no anger, only the authority of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The leader of the group hesitated before stepping forward to take the money. His fingers twitched nervously as he reached out, the weight of Ronaldo's stare making him falter. "Take it," Ronaldo said, his voice calm but firm, "and understand this. This is the last time you exploit someone like this." The young man nodded quickly, stuffing the money into his pocket without a word. His companions looked equally uncomfortable, their earlier confidence completely shattered. They glanced at Alex, then at Ronaldo, before retreating into the crowd, their heads bowed. For the first time that day, the street felt quieter, the tension dissolving into a sense of uneasy calm. Alex stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. His eyes darted between the departing young men and Ronaldo, who turned to face him. "It's over," Ronaldo said gently, his voice softer now. "They won't bother you again." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes, spilling over as he clutched his bag tighter. His voice broke as he tried to speak. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to do this." Ronaldo crouched slightly, meeting Alex at eye level. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his tone filled with warmth. "No one should have to face what you went through. You've been through enough." Alex nodded, his lips trembling as more tears streamed down his cheeks. The relief on his face was palpable, his hunched shoulders beginning to straighten as if a weight had finally been lifted. "You've saved me," he said, his voice barely audible. Ronaldo smiled softly, placing a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." The crowd, which had been silently watching the exchange, began to clap. It wasn't loud or intrusive, just a quiet, heartfelt acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Ronaldo glanced around briefly, his expression humble, before returning his attention to Alex. "Let me give you a ride home," Ronaldo offered, his voice kind. "You shouldn't have to walk alone after everything you've been through." Alex hesitated, his pride and gratitude warring within him. I don't want to trouble you," he said, his voice shaky. "It's no trouble," Ronaldo replied with a small smile. "Come on." As Ronaldo led Alex toward his car, the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, the awe and admiration in their voices unmistakable. People took out their phones, recording the moment not for the spectacle, but for the humanity of it. For them, this was more than just a celebrity stepping in. It was a reminder that even those at the pinnacle of fame and success could choose kindness and compassion. Once in the car, Alex sat quietly, his hands still clutching his bag. The ride was silent at first, the weight of the day hanging heavy in the air. But as the car navigated through the city streets, Alex finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "Not everyone would." Ronaldo turned to him, his expression sincere. "That's exactly why I did it," he said, "because too many people would walk away. But when you can help, when you have the chance to make things right, you take it. That's what matters." Alex nodded, his eyes brimming with gratitude. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, he felt a sense of peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he felt seen, valued, and safe. As the car pulled up to Alex's modest home, Ronaldo stepped out and helped him to the door. "Take care of yourself," Ronaldo said, his tone warm but firm. "And remember, you're not alone." Alex looked up at him, his face a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "For everything." Ronaldo smiled, giving him a small nod before stepping back toward the car. As he drove away, he couldn't help but reflect on the moment. It wasn't just about paying off a debt. It was about restoring dignity, about reminding someone that their worth wasn't determined by their struggles. The day had been unexpected, but it was one Ronaldo would never forget. And for Alex, it was a day that reaffirmed his belief that kindness still existed in the world. The car glided through the dimly lit streets of the city, its engine purring softly. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken emotions. Alex sat quietly beside Ronaldo, clutching his bag so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His trembling hands betrayed the weight of his earlier ordeal, but the relief on his face was undeniable. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Alex felt a sense of safety he had long forgotten. Ronaldo turned slightly, his gaze softening as he looked at the man beside him. "Are you okay, Alex?" he asked gently, his voice breaking the silence in the car. Alex nodded hesitantly, his lips pressing together in an attempt to hold back tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he finally said, his voice quivering. "I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought today might be the end for me." Ronaldo's chest tightened at Alex's words. He had seen the pain in Alex's eyes during the confrontation, but hearing it spoken aloud added a new layer of gravity to the moment. "You don't have to thank me," Ronaldo said, his voice calm but firm. "No one should have to go through what you went through today. It's not right." As the car weaved through the bustling city, Alex began to open up, his words spilling out like a floodgate had been lifted. He spoke about how life had been a constant struggle since his wife passed away 5 years ago. She was the strong one, he said, his voice filled with both sorrow and reverence. She kept everything together. After she was gone, things just started falling apart. The bills piled up. My health started failing. And, well, here I am. Ronaldo listened intently, his expression never wavering. He nodded occasionally, letting Alex know that he was being heard. "You've been through so much," Ronaldo said quietly, his admiration for the man's resilience evident. "It takes strength to keep going when the odds are stacked against you." Alex chuckled bitterly, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I didn't feel strong today," he admitted. "I felt small, helpless. If you hadn't stepped in—" His voice trailed off and he shook his head, unable to finish the thought. Ronaldo reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Asking for help doesn't make you weak. And today you showed the kind of courage most people can only hope for." The car slowed as they approached a modest, weathered building tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Ronaldo stepped out first, opening the door for Alex and helping him out of the car. The night air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Alex looked at his home, his expression a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. "This is it," he said softly. "It's not much, but it's mine." Ronaldo smiled warmly. "That's what matters," he said. "It's yours, and it's a place where you can feel safe." As they reached the front door, Alex turned to Ronaldo, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know how to repay you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't just help me today. You reminded me that kindness still exists." Ronaldo reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He pressed it into Alex's hands, his tone gentle but firm. "This isn't repayment," he said. "It's for you. Use it to take care of yourself. Get what you need, and don't let anyone take advantage of you again." Alex stared at the envelope, his hands trembling as he clutched it. I can't accept this," he began, but Ronaldo shook his head. "You can, and you will," Ronaldo said with a small smile. "Because you deserve it, and because sometimes the best way to move forward is to let people help." The older man nodded, overcome with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he looked up at Ronaldo. "You've given me more than money," Alex said. "You've given me hope. That's something I thought I'd lost forever." Ronaldo placed a hand on Alex's shoulder once more, his gaze steady. "Hope is something we should never lose," he said. "And when we do, it's up to others to help us find it again." As Ronaldo stepped back toward the car, Alex stood on his doorstep, watching him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The car began to pull away, and Alex raised a hand in a silent wave. Ronaldo waved back, his expression thoughtful as he disappeared into the night. The story didn't end there. Witnesses to the encounter had captured it on their phones, and within hours, videos of Ronaldo's act of kindness began circulating online. Social media exploded with praise, users from around the world commending his humility and compassion. Headlines read, "Cristiano Ronaldo's selfless act restores faith in humanity," and "A football legend's lesson in kindness." But for Ronaldo, the impact wasn't about the publicity. It was about the look on Alex's face when he realized he wasn't alone. It was about the reminder that even in a world often consumed by greed and indifference, there was always room for compassion. As Ronaldo reflected on the day, a quiet thought settled in his mind. True greatness isn't about what you achieve, it's about what you give back. And somewhere in his modest home, Alex sat at his kitchen table, the envelope still clutched in his hands, a small smile breaking through his tears. For the first time in years, he felt like tomorrow might be a little brighter.